I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about parental involvement in schools. Tell me why this is something that you and your colleagues wanted to take a look at.
The research shows that the extent to which parents are engaged in their children's education, it helps. It is a protective factor for children's, for the number of risk factors that children might experience, such as poverty. So we know that parental engagement is important for children's academic success, so that the more involved the parent is, the better the child is going to perform.
And you knew that from past research?
Past research has shown that children of highly engaged parents are going to do better at school, and in particular children who live in poverty, because poverty is a risk factor for academic problems. We know that it acts as a protective factor. So even in communities and families who are living in poverty, if the parent is highly engaged, the children are going to succeed.
What is it about that parental involvement that seems to mitigate the risk?
Basically, I think that it is the parents are knowledgeable of what the child is doing, but also it's communicating to the child through these behaviors, that through being involved and being interested, that what they're doing in school is important, right? They can also if they feel comfortable going to the school and talking to the teachers, and so because of those reasons, we were interested in looking at that. However, it is also important to say that the way in which parents demonstrate their engagement and how visible their engagement is going to depend on their own cultural values, beliefs. And so, although parental engagement is a protective factor, it also varies by culture. So what my colleague and I wanted to do was to uncover the unique ways that Latino parents were engaged in their children's education.
What did you and your colleagues look at specifically, and what did you find?
What we know about parental engagement mostly has been based on what a particular group of people have done in the past, and so parental engagement, our knowledge of parental engagement is founded on what middle-class, monolingual, English-speaking parents do. So what my colleague and I wanted to do was uncover what Latino parents were doing, and also, and in particular, develop a measure to assess parental engagement from the ground up. Right? So our studies, there were a set of studies that we did that we first talked to 172 parents in different places in New York, in all the boroughs except Staten Island. And so we engaged them in conversations both in Spanish and in English, and asked them what kinds of behaviors they engage in that support their children's academic success. And based on that, we developed a measure that basically assessed what parents were doing, right? And the extent to which they were being engaged in their children's education. And we developed the measure both in Spanish and in English simultaneously, so they're not translated versions of each other. What we found was that for Latino parents, there are 4 different ways in which they are engaged in their children's education. The first one we called basic education, because it is similar to the term educación in Spanish. And educación in Spanish, unlike education in English, educación means to really think about the child holistically and to foster children's socio-emotional development. So the basic education dimension or way in which parents were being engaged, really what was capturing are those parental behaviors that were fostering children's socio-emotional learning.
What are some of those behaviors that you found?
Yeah. For example, is showing children to obey parents, to respect parents, to share, to be a good friend, right? So those are some of the behaviors that parents were really focusing. It did also include ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. So teaching your child the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s were also in this dimension or this factor called basic education. The second factor was supplemental education. And supplemental education it involved all those parent behaviors that were fostering children's early literacy development, such as reading to your child, telling stories to your child, but also learning from the community, such as going to the museums, going to after school, registering your child for after school classes, music lessons, sports, that kind of community learning outside of the school was subsumed in this dimension that we call supplemental education. So it's going above and beyond basic stuff that for Latino parents are basic stuff, right? Which is mostly socio-emotional learning. And then the third dimension was school participation. And school participation really is capturing all those visible behaviors that parents do that are involved, that in very explicit ways connect the parent to the school. So volunteering for the school for field trips if you're being asked to, volunteering skills that you have in creating things for the classroom for the school, volunteering for field trips, running for parent positions in the school. So all of that we called school participation. That's the third dimension.
Was that an area where either culturally or traditionally some parents have been hesitant to get involved in?
There's a number of reasons why parents might not be engaged in the ways that the school expects them to be engaged, right? I think that oftentimes there's a language barrier, right? And the parents might not feel comfortable going to the school. I think also that at least with the families that I work with and the families that we were working with, which are families that are recent immigrants that tend to live in low-income communities, the lack of knowledge of what the expectations are of U.S. schools. Right, so U.S. schools expect parents to be advocates for their children. They expect parents to come to parent-teacher conferences. These parents might not know that this is the case, or it also that their work is not as flexible, that their work hours are not as flexible. Right, so if a parent, for instance, works the night shift, right? And the mom, because most Latino parents most Latino children live in two-parent homes. So the mom is with the children and the father is working the night shift. I mean, they don't have anyone to take care of the kid, right? And so their lives are not as easygoing and as simple as mainstream American families' lives are, right? And so because of those reasons, they might not be as present in the schools. But it does not mean that they're not involved, because as you can see, there are other ways in which they're being involved with participating in basic education, supplemental education, and the last dimension is what we called future orientation. And really what that was about was talking about your child, even at a very young age, because the study was done with preschool children, talking to your child about the importance of being educated, the importance of doing well in school. And so these, there were a couple of items that fell there. And this was very particular of recent immigrant families.
Do they plant the seed earlier for the steps beyond a high school education, whether it's training or college?
I think that it depends on the parents' own background. I think that what parents want is their children to graduate from high school. I think that's important. I think that some parents do want their children to go beyond. It's very interesting because there are some parents that explicitly talk about how there's a gender divide in their countries of origin, right? And how they want their daughters to go beyond what they were able to do, because they had to stop going to school because their parents didn't have enough money to send them beyond elementary school, or because they needed help working the fields. But they want their daughters to go beyond high school, to become a professional. What Latino parents often said to me was, I want them to become someone. Right? And that means to go beyond what is expected of them to be a professional. And so whatever path they may take to do that, they're encouraging their children, and they're planting that seed when they're 3.
If you had to speak to parents, are there some things you would suggest to them?
Because my work mostly focuses on Latino parents, I think that it is important for Latino parents to continue doing what they're doing. I mean, they are involved. I think that they have to remember that it is important to be involved, to ask your child how they're doing at school, to try to connect to the teachers. I think that they should also be mindful of what the expectations are of the U.S. educational system, and to find ways to learn about what those expectations are, but also to keep doing what they're doing, to foster that socio-emotional learning in their children as they're doing, because that's still important.
For parents who have children who may have some additional challenges, some learning disabilities or challenges, what would you recommend?
I think I would tell them not to be afraid of asking for help. I think that early intervention, there's research that shows that the earlier the intervention, the better it is for them and their children. So it is important that they are not ashamed nor afraid to ask for help early on, to have their child identified early, to see what issue the child might have, and then to seek the help that they need. There are ways. There are services in place for the child in this country, so they should feel welcome to actually seek them out. Yeah.